out of the ordinary insights. Brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. I'm Natasha Jacobs. In the hot seat with me this week, I have Gerard Brandjes, the Vice President for Nokia South East Africa. Gerard, welcome.
Thank you very much, Natasha.
Now, you took over the role little over a year and a half ago, January 2012 to be exact. Before then, GM for the Southern African operations. How's the transition been from the one role to the other, and what have you managed to implement over the last year and a half?
So I think it's always great to come home. So I think that's the first thing. You know, I've been traveling for a number of different years, based in many locations across Africa. So always great to come home, be with friends and family. But I think from a pure business perspective, there's been some great things that we've been able to accomplish over the last year and a half. Even though there's been some trouble at a global level and there's been some challenges, we've been able to drive the business forward across South and East Africa really, really well over the last year and a half.
You've brought me to my second point. We know the current international position of Nokia. I think there's a recent study by Gartner, rating the different handsets, losing traction to big players like Apple and Samsung in the market, but still very much dominant in the African continent. What's been your key strategy to success here as opposed to, the struggles we've seen internationally?
So there's tremendous affinity behind our Nokia brand in Africa. If you look at recent studies that have been conducted as recent as last year, particularly in South Africa, you look at the Sunday Times Brand Award, we were number 5 in South Africa in terms of our brand. Across many of the African countries as well, we're right up there, and there's tremendous affinity towards our brand. And that's been developed over a number of years where we've been able to add back to the communities in which we do business. So I think that helps from a brand love perspective. Consumers identify with our brand. But I think more importantly, we've been able to go to market in a pretty cohesive way with a number of partners. And we've been able to put in place the right strategies, which are centered around our Nokia strategy. Our Nokia strategy is threefold. Firstly, we need to win in smartphones, and we're making tremendous progress with our Lumia portfolio. Secondly, we need to mobilize the whole mobile phone segment, particularly with our Asha mobile phone portfolios. We're doing a lot of work there. And then we've been introducing some innovation, particularly around imaging, around location-based services to the consumers. So our value proposition that we put in place for South Africa and by extension the rest of the continent has really resonated with consumers.
Let's start with the smartphone segment. Now, cost plays a significant role here, and let's bring it back to emerging territories like Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa. You have an influx of cheaper Chinese brands. You also have the aspirational fields of handsets like your Apple iPhones and your Samsungs. How do you keep that brand loyalty, and how much does cost play into it? Do you purposely create models that suit the pockets of your target market? And how do you also keep that aspirational aspect that people still want to buy into the Nokia brand?
I think that's a very, very good question. I think African consumers are just like any other consumers. They all have needs and aspirations, and they all want quality products to satisfy their needs. I think the big thing that we've been able to do is we've innovated around our business model, and we've lowered the cost to serve in particular African markets. So our business cost has been reduced over time. I think importantly, we don't just play on price, we play on value as well. So if you look at some of the value adds that we bring to the proposition, services like Nokia Life, which really gives extensions into people's lives, things like education, things like health, where we really reinforce our proposition. So price is a very important factor, but it's more about value to us. And then you essentially reinforce that by the brand proposition that you bring. And Nokia always stands for reliability, quality, and durability. So you put that package together for African consumers, and essentially we've been able to compete with that proposition.
Let's talk about market share in the smartphone market. I know you are hesitant to comment per country, but from a regional perspective, how's Southern Africa looking and East Africa?
So a recent study done by Worldwide Works in 2012 gave some numbers, and those numbers were pretty impressive from a Nokia perspective. It still said that in the context of the South African market, 5 out of 10 consumers are still buying a Nokia. And that's relatively, I guess, representative of the rest of the African continent. In most of the markets that we operate, we are market leaders. Particularly when you look at the mobile phone segment, which is your first and your feature phones. When you look at your smartphone segment, yes, we have lost some ground over the last couple of years, but with our Lumia portfolio, we're starting to win. We start to see month-on-month increases in terms of consumer activations in the smartphone segment. So, we're very hopeful. We see the progress, and I think our strategy is starting to pay off in that space.
One of your strategies in that market has been your partnership with Microsoft, with the Windows-enabled phones. How's that playing out, both locally, and can you give us some context to how it's doing internationally as well?
Sure. So in February 2011, our president and CEO, Stephen Elop announced that moving forward our smartphone play would be based on the Windows operating system, and subsequent to that we've been able to launch a number of devices at different price points, and very importantly for us we've now been able to take it into multiple geographies. So as we've increased the portfolio, covered more geographies, we've seen significant increases in terms of activations. I think the partnership is doing relatively well. You know, there's a partnership, of course, at a global level, but more importantly at a local level. And what we see in Africa, in most of the territories that we operate, is a cohesive approach with our Microsoft colleagues in the way in which we go to market. You know, so we're investing jointly behind specific activities, and we're going to market in a coordinated way. And as I said, we're starting to get the wins.
Now, in terms of product development and app development for your smartphone, specifically targeted for the African market, how important are partnerships with developers on the ground? You know, the Nokia store, what you offer free, what you monetize. How important are those partnerships in understanding that it's not a cookie-cutter model, that you need to understand the territories that you operate in?
It's absolutely fundamental, because people have moved just beyond basic communication. People are looking for apps and content that enrich their lives. And we've invested heavily in the ecosystem. So there's a specific number of initiatives, and I'll touch on a few. So we were founding members of M Labs. Now, M Labs essentially are labs that are set up which give developers the tools that enable them to actually develop apps and content. We've set up labs in South Africa, in Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, etc. We also participate in a particular organization called Lions of Africa, where we try to foster innovation in the broader ecosystem, and we hook up local developers and local content providers with access to financial sources, be it from local or international. So there's a host of activities that we are driving. We have a team of people on the ground whose sole focus is to catalyze this ecosystem and bring to market apps and content for African consumers.
How do you monetize that, though? Because there is a component strong, I wouldn't call it CSIR, but it is developmental with the M Labs, bringing in new talent, building that innovation ecosystem. But from a company perspective, you're still a business. So how do you monetize that?
There's a number of tools that we have in place. I think that the most important thing that we've been able to do is provide the ability to monetize for developers. So we have things like operator billing and carrier billing, which then allow the consumer to buy through their mobile phone account, through their data account, and actually buy and receive content and applications. So we provided the tools which enable the developers to actually monetize. And there's been quite a number of successful developers across the African continent who've been able to make a significant amount of money. So I think for us at this point in time, it's not really a revenue generating activity that we're driving. It's more about catalyzing the ecosystem and making sure that there's the apps and the content that people actually want. And I think we've done a great job. If you look at the amount of apps and content available on the marketplace at current, it's well over 135,000 apps as we speak.
And that ties into your whole brand loyalty, because if you look after your consumers look after you.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go into the smart feature phone market. We're sitting with an estimated 650 million cell phone users on the African continent. A large portion still dependent on feature phones due to bandwidth restrictions, unavailability of handsets. How do you tap into that with your smart feature phones, so to speak, and still make it relevant for the market, and then building on that as the technology develops, as bandwidth comes in, to grow that into a feature phone market?
So we're in a very fortunate position because of the breadth of our portfolio. So some of the features and some of the innovation that we bring at the top end, we're able to bring into the lower and mid-range over time, and we've successfully been able to do that. So if you look at our mid-range portfolio, which is our Azure portfolio, many of the external institutions are actually classifying those as smartphones. And what we've been able to do is bring those to market at affordable price points and give an experience which is deserving of smartphone type characteristics. So I think that's been really, really important for us over the last couple of months, that we've been able to put affordable devices in the hands of the masses, which give people all the benefits and the features of smartphone usage.
In the territories you do operate in, there is a strong pirate market and cloned phones. How do you deal with that aspect when you are bringing in phones at affordable prices, but people are still going to shops thinking they're buying a Nokia and it might be a Mokia?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenging thing in Africa. I mean,
do you work closely with the governments on the ground?
Absolutely. So I think from an Africa perspective, there's 54 countries and there's different taxation and duty regimes across all of those African countries. And therefore, by nature, product does tend to flow from one territory to the next. However, we do have partnerships in place with governments. So in South Africa, we have a partnership with the Department of Science and Technology. And in Kenya, we have a partnership with the government of Kenya. And I think we've been able to make tremendous progress. And I'll take you back to Kenya in 2009, where one of the big issues in the market was the actual flow of grey product from neighbouring countries into Kenya, as well as counterfeit product into Kenya. And through a process of 18 months working with the government and lobbying effectively with the government, taxation, treasury, etc., we were able to remove the VAT component associated with mobile phones, and thus overnight reducing the purchase price by 18%. Which had a number of positive impacts for the economy. Number one, counterfeit almost reduced by half overnight because the price points went down and the economic incentive wasn't there any longer. Consumer rights were now starting to be protected because we had proper legitimate product intended for Nokia being sold in Kenya and protected by warranty. And a study by Deloitte showed us that in 2009, the actual sales of mobile phones in Kenya increased by 200%. So, by working with your government partners, you can actually, not only have a good commercial business case in place, but you can actually benefit the entire economy and by extension the consumers in that particular market.
How much work goes into establishing that relationship? As you mentioned, 54 countries, not a homogenous continent. So how do you go into each of the territories, be it Southern, East Africa, deal with the governments on the ground and explain the value of a proposition like this?
So I think it starts at a very high level where you look at the lead markets in a particular geographic hub. So if you look in the context of East Africa, Kenya could be seen as the lead, and you establish your operations there and you start building your relationships there, and from extension of that you then move into the neighboring countries. But it's a tremendous amount of work. But I guess over time, if you can display that there is real benefit to the government and therefore by extension to the people, people are willing to listen. And once you have a track record of success, you can continue to build on that. So, back to that example, because of that move that we helped the government to take, we then established a longer term partnership with them. And today we are partners in many education initiatives in Kenya. So it's a question of time. It's also a question of intent and motives that the organisation has.
But governments change, though. We've just known that President Kenyatta has just taken over. What is the risk associated with regime changes, especially when you are dealing with these relationships, so that there's extended value and investment into this post one president to the next?
So I think it goes just beyond the president. So, in that particular example in Kenya, we're working with the permanent secretary for ICT, and many of those people are still in the government structures. And again, if you have a track record of success, and if you show that you're investing into the local economy, and you have tangible results to actually show the people in power, there shouldn't be too much of an issue continuing that relationship.